Yeah.
We turned the dial more than we ever had before, but we turned the dial, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't new to people, right?
Yeah.
Particularly our internal team, our external relations team, sort of understanding like, oh, okay, this is that normal process, but also being part of the process. I mean, some of the greatest feedback we had around some of the way that we were talking about ourselves, or the way that we were showing our sort of logo or imagery, came from our junior graphic designer that we have on our staff, right?
That's
and to our managers and to others. And so really listening to people and not just being the 5 decision makers that might be in the room that are making that. And so being able to be reflective of that.
Get everybody involved, right?
As much as you can. For us, like, obviously there was a lot of quietness around that, but like, there was about 20 people who knew for about 6 months. Well, we're in this together. Let's roll up our sleeves and get everyone as part of that, right? Of what that is. And if someone sort of, it may be worth having that conversation and saying, what was the about?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Holly Basta, one of your co-hosts for The Diligent Leader. I'm here with
Alex Fakeri, and thank you very much for joining us today. We're on a great episode where we're going to be introducing a returning guest, Jonathon Rondeau. Thank you very much for joining us today, sir.
Thank you for having us. Me.
All of us. No, it's great. And, we are excited because not only are you the CEO, president and CEO of Fello, but Fello's been going through a lot of changes, and I think, as any organization knows, change is a difficult thing. Yeah. And we're really excited to hear about the changes that have been happening over at Fello, and maybe you can enlighten us today and share some tidbits for us.
Absolutely. So Fello is a 64-year organization that supports people with disabilities to live, work, and connect with their community. And on May 21st, we took the transition our name from the Arc Central Chesapeake Region to Fello. Our mission, vision, and values remain the same, but over the last 8 years, we've grown tremendously around a host of different services, including housing, supporting people with disabilities to self-direct their lives, and then our core services, and just really felt a new name better reflected who we really are, and then where we're going.
So that was essentially the core of the goal, right?
That is the core of the goal,
reflect.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. Now, I guess while you're doing this, this is, and Holly, I mean, feel free to interrupt me or kick me under the table, but the idea here is that when you make a change like that from a branding perspective, your logistics are crazy, right? Especially when you're talking physical, digital, the whole 9 yards. Yeah. But as far as, I think the most important thing, which I would imagine you probably hold close to the chest, is keeping the mission on track, right? Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think so. Your brand is your identity. So whether you're a person and your name, right, or an organization, and especially an organization like us who is about meeting the needs of the communities we serve. And so we didn't take that for granted and wanted to be really thoughtful about the process of making sure that we picked the right name, but also making sure that the change was in a way we were prepared for it. So making sure our internal stakeholders fully understood about the transition before it happened, but making sure the day on May 21st, everything switched. Our web presence, our signage on our buildings, the way our vehicles that are for our property management team are wrapped, to the pen you use when you sign in at the front desk, right? Sort of everything as part of that. And I think that then sort of showed to the community like less confusion. And then we've done a lot of outreach where we've done webinars, we have open houses to really make sure that our stakeholders across the state really understand that this isn't changing who we are. It's just a better reflection of who our identity.
Yeah.
And for folks that are not familiar with the former brand, Arc, explain to us a little bit about what it means to be Fello and sort of why that better represented your organization at this time.
So all the work we do in partnership. We do it in partnership with people and their families. We do it in partnership with communities. And so when you think about Fello, you think about fellowship. We are fellow citizens. We are fellow community members. And so this idea around sort of doing things together. we are always stronger when we're doing that. And Fello was founded on an idea of a civil rights movement around making sure that there was equity and access for children with disabilities in the 60s to have access to education, to housing, to services. That doesn't happen as an individual pursuit. That happens when we all sort of wrap around and work together. And so that's the impetus around the name Fello, is that idea of fellowship and connection and interconnectivity with each other.
That's great. And so, and I want to digress as well for just a moment to help people understand that this change in the mission and everything that you're doing, it took a lot of storytelling in a lot of ways, right? To help people understand internal, as well as your internal teams.
Yeah.
And let's comment, how big is the internal team right now?
So Fello has 650 employees. Most of our employees, about 450 of them, are direct support professionals working to support people with disabilities in the community. So they don't necessarily come to an office every day, but they're helping people live independently. They're helping people get jobs and maintain their jobs. They're helping them access things in the community, whether that's working out, going to events, things like that, and sort of everything in between.
Yeah.
And so, it's not, I think there's a lot of, the process is a lot of reflection of really sort of saying it's not just sort of slapping a new name on it, and also making sure that it felt true to our brand. And so even under our previous name, where we were connected to different across the country to organizations, we were a little unique in that we were really trying to drive the brand that felt like us, and felt like who we are. And so we really wanted to make sure that the name and how we talked about that. And so there's been some pivots that we've done. If you're on any of our sort of social media or go to our website, we're less focused on the direct service that someone might be connected to, and sort of more about the why we even exist, which is really about equity and inclusion in our communities, and how do we make our communities equitable and inclusive, and we do that, how we do that in partnership and things like that.
Well, and I think that's important, whether people realize it or not, is because you can't, you have to not only convince, that's the wrong term to use, but really you have to bring on 650 people, and that's an accomplishment. I mean, you're talking a lot of remote people as well as a lot of internal people, and you have to help them understand. Not that they don't, but you have to retell the story in a way that gets people to understand the vision, and that's an amazing, project you guys have undergone. And I think when I look back at the logistics of saying, okay, we have all these vehicles, we have all these signs, we have all these messages, all these team members what I'm really curious about is, what are your lessons learned after going back and looking at that? Was there anything you do differently, or was it smooth sailing? I mean, what have you learned?
Well, the first thing I would say is I hope that we are never rebranding again, right? That we have found our identity within that, or maybe it's 64 years from now and I will not be the leader at that time. But I do think, I think in many ways there's lots of things that I would do exactly the same. Our operations team and our strategic communications team really did a master class in how you sort of pivot and do those things.
I love that.
The collaboration that happened between our external partners that were supporting us through that transition, whether they be our legal partners, our digital comms partners, our the branding firm that supported us, our board, everyone was aligned. And it was really, my role as the CEO was really to act as sort of like the cruise director of that, right? To make sure that people understood that why this was happening and what the timing was with that. And we changed our timeline about how we were communicating things internally and with key partners a couple of times, because we wanted to make sure that it was authentic to us. I think the only thing that I would say that we may have done differently is really thinking about the timeline with some of our sort of logistics around digital media and legal things. It just takes a lot longer for your name change to happen. We have a couple of digital platforms that are sort of inconsistent because they take up to 60 days. So I think that's the big, but that's really small.
Really small.
And you wouldn't have experienced that until you actually sort of go through it. But
Yeah.
no, I'm incredibly proud of our team. I'm really proud of and thrilled that our community is embracing our change.
Right.
The people we serve and our families that we serve are really embracing it or asking good questions on why and spurring that.
Yeah.
Our team did a webinar with a specific group of stakeholders that are in a specific program, and halfway through the webinar, they're like, "Oh, we want to know more about this." And so it was more about other parts of the organization. And so I think it's a launching pad, I think, for us, especially as we are going into our 65th year next year.
That's awesome.
So I'm really curious to know from a leadership perspective, as you noted, your team did a lot of pre-planning and prep work to ensure that this was going to be a smooth process. But I'm interested to hear more from you on a leadership perspective, how you sort of guided your teams through this transition, and what do you think they were seeking the most? You mentioned about the external stakeholders, what they wanted to know, but what did the team members want to know? What did they need?
I think they needed transparency and honesty, right? And so transparency on sort of what is the process and how are we doing those? How are decisions being made? And so that was very clear when in the fall, the board approved a process that I outlined for them, and then that was shared with stakeholders as appropriate. And then honesty, right? And so I was honest with my executive leadership team around this is the biggest strategic risk the organization, and we've taken a lot of strategic risks over the last 8 years. We've grown a lot. We've gone into new industries and new ventures, but to change who you are, to no longer be affiliated to a national brand is, after 64 years, is a big deal. And as the CEO, I also wanted to make sure that people, any stress or anxiety I had about carrying that weight did not dictate our process, right? And so really just being honest about that. Why I'm a person who tends to make decisions fairly quickly, why I might be moving a little slower on this piece, or why I'm asking these questions, right? And so just the transparency and honesty, which is part of our culture as is, but it was something that really tested us and said, we need to do more of this, and that we had to be, there's this idea of like radical candor or radical being added to anything, but falling into that, I do think that there was some like radical honesty throughout this, and a lot of sort of self-reflection for a number of our leaders or our employees. I mean, I have employees that have worked for us who have worked for within other ARCs in this one. I have employees that have worked here for 15, 20, 25, 30 years, right? And so that changes a lot too. And so being able to meet people where they're at, to be able to engage in conversation, to be able to check in, even if they agree with the change, it's still a change, right? And so sort of reflecting what that means, and finding ways to make it excitement. We had a total rewards fair, and we gave away a lot of cool stuff to our employees. And so we usually average about 100 employees coming to that. We had over 350 employees who came to our total rewards fair. So I think, not all of them were interested in learning about the great benefits we provide. I think most of them were there for the new. But to me, that was like, oh, you're excited for this, right? Like, and they were generally excited to be there to get new T-shirts and to be able to, like, when I ride up the elevator, or I was at our Severn location yesterday, and just seeing the amount of people excited and wearing their new apparel or their new ID badge is really great.
Well, I have to reflect on this because I think we work with a lot of leaders from, when on the day job, so to speak, working with Mojo. And over 20 years, 20 plus years, we have worked with a number of companies that go through a rebrand, right? And you see, and not as in a negative to them, but they get hung up on the smallest little details, right? And that decision becomes analysis by process by analysis, right? And so taking, changing your slogan, changing your logo is one thing. Keeping your message on point orchestrating that effort, it's a major undertaking. And I know some of our viewers here are probably watching, and they may be thinking about this rebrand. So I think it's great that you're sharing this story with them, because it can happen at any point in your journey.
Correct.
I think is the takeaway, right?
Yep.
And then, it is okay for you to be at a point in your organization where you have to say, are we going in the right direction? And so now it may not manifest in a rebrand.
Correct. But I also think many organizations, whether you're rebranding or not, stays too static in how they talk about their organization, right? So how you talk about your organization needs to reflect, one, how you actually do business.
Right.
And that's no different if you're a for-profit, nonprofit. But two, it also has to reflect around the way that your stakeholders want to engage with that, right? And I think a lot of times businesses, no matter their size, will do a rebrand, and then they stick with all that language, right, within that. And so I share that to say, like, for us, it was a little bit easier because over the last 8 years, we've probably been slowly turning the dial on how we talk about what we do. Some of it just had to be from growth. We're serving 900 people to over 4,000 people. Like, you just have to pivot because you have more stakeholders. But I think that prepared us to be able to then turn the dial. Yeah. We turned the dial more than we ever had before, but we turned the dial, right? Yeah. But it wasn't new to people, right? Yeah. Particularly our internal team, our external relations team, sort of understanding, like, oh, okay, this is that normal process, but also being part of the process. I mean, some of the greatest feedback we had around some of the way that we were talking about ourselves, or the way that we were showing our sort of logo or imagery, came from our junior graphic designer that we have on our staff, right? That's and to our managers and to others. And so really we listening to people and not just being the 5 decision makers that might be in the room that are making that. And so being able to be reflective of that.
Get everybody involved, right?
As much as you can. For us, like, obviously there was a lot of quietness around that, but like, there was about 20 people who knew for about 6 months. Well, we're in this together. Let's roll up our sleeves and get everyone as part of that, right? Of what that is. And if someone sort of, it may be worth having that conversation to say, what was the about? Yeah. And that sort of, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to change anything, but pause and ask, opposed to just,
well, to your point earlier,
we have a deadline to get to, right?
Yeah.
Like, because like that can be blinding when you've picked the date and you can't move that date.
Yeah. The intensity, the focus can, you can lose sight, right? That's difficult. It's one thing you just kind of mentioned, is that when you have everybody focused on that, right, and you want that mission to, it gives them an opportunity to get excited about it, and also just help drive that creativity. So I think the transparency that you had with the key stakeholders that were part of that transition, right, is exciting. But even more so, to your earlier point of, when it gets out there and you're evolving your brand, you're evolving your message, you're showing you're a living, breathing organization to the world, right? You're not just the static company that has not evolved or moved. And we've learned from COVID and the recession of 08 and everything, like, you have to stay, an evolving organization, because the needs change. Yeah. People's expectations change, right? Of their experiences outside of what's happening in your 4 walls. Right?
Yeah, I think the sort of business school adage of, like, sort of, when things get tough, you need a retreat, and that's your time to reflect internal, doesn't work anymore, right? And so I firmly believe it's the time to sort of lean in. And so coming out of late 2020 is when we leaned in, and we were one of the only providers to continue to take people into services and continue to provide a whole array of services. But then leaning in while other people were catching up, we were just leaning in further, right? And so it put us in a sort of a different path, and we have a similar thing as state and federal budgets sort of change. Yeah, we're not ignoring those things, but at the same time, they're not stopping us from thinking about those. We just are being, we just have to be more aware and sort of make sure we're looking all around us about what's happening.
And as I give this, I want to give this back to Holly, but I do want to say this. What I love, and in reflection of what you said, is that this whole thing has been happening for a very long time. This rebrand, is just literally the flip of a switch for the final component, the unveiling. But really, nothing is, you guys have been going this course, like you said, slowly turning it, going the direction that you need to go out of the demand and the vision. Yeah. And then, okay, but you just changed your shirt one day, right? That's all it really kind of came down to.
No, I think it is.
Right?
And I think there's lots of different analogies you can use around it, that piece. But I think, it really, it was a natural evolution. It wasn't that. And I think that also is why our stakeholders are embracing it the way it is, because it is, well, it may have been the initial shock, right? Because it just changed one day, right? But once you get over that and you're like, how can we not have seen this, right? Like, and so I think that
well said.
That has allowed us to sort of really quickly pivot and move.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to know, because I think there's so much relevancy in this conversation right now. There are many organizations, corporations, and other entities that are going through, changes and challenges at this time, just due to our economic state at this point. So I want to know, for anyone who's listening to the show, from a leadership perspective, what is the biggest challenge that this has presented to you personally as a leader that they can draw some wisdom from, if they're considering a rebrand or if they're in the midst of a rebrand? Talk to those people right now.
What hurt the most?
So I think what hurts the most is having, you're gonna have a lot of people who are sort of through that process saying, is this the right time? Is that the right name? Is this the right thing? And as the leader, you don't want to be blind to those comments, but they can also be very challenging to move forward, right?
Yeah.
Because that pressure that I talked about before, right, only gets added on with everyone going, I don't love that, or I don't this thing, or this thing, and everyone has an opinion, even though our circle was small during a periods of this. And so I think it's being true to. For myself, we started, our board and myself started having this conversation 2 years prior to making a decision, right? And then we spent another 10 months doing that. And so I was in a place where it was like, this is the right decision. Did I know the name? That sort of, the board was in the right place, because it wasn't a decision that we started to have. And so I think that foundation allowed us to sort of be, and allowed me to be sort of steadfast in that this is the right decision. I wasn't questioning the decision during the process. It was, and so I think that allows. So don't start the process if you're still not sure. If there's some hope of doubt, if you think you're going to lose something, take that extra time to do that before you actually make the decision.
Yeah, because if you're not invested, how are you going to get your team members to buy in?
In the heat of the deadlines and the decisions you have to make around something as important as this, it's not something you can fake. It's just not, right? And people needed to, even when we were deciding on the name, all the eyes in the room were on what my thoughts were on that initial thing, that initial feedback. When there was revisions of that, right, that sort of thing. And so being able to show up as yourself and be transparent and be honest, but also be mindful, like, there's other people who are impacted by this. Is probably the biggest leadership challenge.
Yeah, because you can be. You can get the doubt, right? You know, your responsibilities are obviously overwhelming, but at the end of the day, you can get the doubt. But it is a lot easier. There's a difference between having doubt whether you should do it at all, or having doubt with a little nuance, a little variable.
And you can change a nuance, right? Like, if for some reason our logo didn't hit on all cylinders, we can evolve that over time.
Right.
What we can't go back is necessarily change our name back.
Right.
That sort of thing. That can't happen. I mean, if a color doesn't work, right, we can evolve that over time. And so I think you're 100% right? Being steadfast in the decision that this was that.
Correct.
The other stuff can change. Yeah, it's expensive and there's costs, right? Like, don't get me wrong, but those things can change.
Absolutely.
You really sort of can't go back. And I think we were doing, and I think I get this question a lot around, is people make assumptions because a lot of times rebrands happen through mergers or negativity.
Yes,
right?
very true. Very true.
Something negative has happened. There was a lawsuit, a whole host of things. And so we've been getting lots of questions about sort of the why, and those are like, that's the only reason, right? Like, because that's very untypical, right? Like, particularly if you look at banks or other businesses, right, it's usually around sort of those two things. And so having people understand, no, it just didn't feel like us, and we wanted to sort of evolve.
Well, and I love that you talked about working with your stakeholders to determine what was important for them and make sure that they're invested and that they're going to buy into this and that it's representing this community group of organization.
Our engagement, well, we never said we were talking to them about potentially rebrand. We've been engaging with our stakeholders, particularly coming out of COVID, a lot, right? And so just asking questions, getting feedback. We do a lot of surveys with the people we serve. We do things with our employees. As well as just having conversations with people and taking that feedback sort of to heart, and sort of that all that data was in our decision making process. Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of curious now. So we know the mission's unchanged. We know where we're going. We know the brand's been elevated. And I guess as this reinforcement and this now new energy is coming on, I mean, it's putting a lot of things on the radar right now. It's the next, what's next, right? Yeah. We've done this, so I'm assuming you have a goal and vision.
Yeah.
And I was recently reading in the headlines, I thought this was interesting. It kind of reminded me, okay, now there's something else to do, right? And it was in Illinois, it was Governor Pritzker who signed an executive order about helping people with autism and with residential having homes and things along those lines. And so as I see something like that come into play, I'm like, okay, we can't just name's over now.
Yep.
Like, what's next?
So advocacy has always been a part of who we are, and continues to be that. And I think in this moment in time when there is limited resources, meaning dollars, right?
Yeah.
And so our focus is really making sure that people have access to the services they want, and that there's choice, whether that is you're getting services through a provider, you choose to self-direct, whether that's through an organization like Fello, whether that's through any of the other great organizations in the community that serves people with disabilities. And I think our focus has always been, and we have over the last several years upped that engagement around advocacy.
Yeah.
So we have 2 team members who support our people we serve in their own self-advocacy called Living Boldly, and we're supporting them to be self-advocates and to grow in that work, and sort of sharing information with our families and stakeholders when things come up, and helping people understand how complex sort of policy actually affects them, right?
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes something comes up and no one knows, and so helping translate that. But I think what started as our civil rights movement for us in the early 60s still is a civil rights movement today, and that's not going to change anytime in the near future.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And just, following up on that, I'm wondering if there have been any important partnerships or collaborations that have developed during this transition that are going to help you to advance your mission.
So I think our collaborations, our partnerships have gotten deeper. I don't know that we have any necessarily new ones, but I think one of those is our storytelling, and so partnering with you all around how we tell our stories and our other branding firms, but also partnering with the people we serve to be able to tell their stories, and families we serve and our employees to tell their stories. I think because that tells the depth and breadth of our mission much more than a press release or a website can ever do that.
Sure.
And using trying to figure out in this world of 60-second sound bites how you can actually talk about the impact of our work. Because we are a complex organization that does our services over 4 core areas across the state. And so that can take us an hour to fully get to the depth and breadth of that. But that's not the way any of us work.
Yeah.
If it's more than 15 or 30 seconds, people are done, right? And so how do we sort of do that? And so I think that's the aha moment, and we've deepened our relationship with our partners who are helping us be able to tell that story.
So the importance in telling the stories of the clients that you serve, I think it has a lot of value for different reasons. Mm-hmm. But what I really love about the fact that you're telling these stories, this presents an opportunity to present that complicated nature of serving these folks, because not every person has the exact same needs. And I think your organization works really hard to make sure that we're addressing the core things that they need immediately. So in telling their story, you're also raising awareness for people that are not necessarily aware of the challenges that face the people that you served. And I don't mean that to be complicated, but what I'm saying is that you don't know what you don't know until you've heard these stories about the type of challenges that their families are facing or the individuals themselves, then you don't really understand the complexity of this.
Correct. I think when someone's telling their story, the way you hear it, you can be different. So if you're a person with a disability hearing someone's story, you're like, oh, I see myself and I want to achieve that.
Yeah.
If you're a donor, you're like, oh, that they supported that. If you're someone looking for a job, you're like, oh, that's what the direct support professional does to support that person, right? Like, and so there's lots of different ways in a way that words reading it doesn't get in the same way, right? There's a three-dimensionality of that, right? And I think just us as human beings crave that sort of willingness to be able to sort of touch you while you're not breaking the fourth wall necessarily in a video. Being able to either read, but particularly using video to tell people's story, I think is incredibly powerful. And it simplifies in many ways the behind the scenes of what's actually happening to achieve whatever that person may be of achieving or describing what our mission is.
Well, what you said earlier, and there's a lot of truth to that, is, you mentioned how when people, there's something about stating a mission with words, right? And I think it was a Gallup poll or Nielsen ratings or something that said people would rather watch a 4-minute video than read one paragraph, right? In this era of 60, 30-second little sound bites, right? And the truth is, going back to, all of this, that storytelling through video, through messaging does make it relatable, right? And I think that obviously we are in a video format right now and audible for some people, but at the end of the day, I think leaders have a job of removing the obstacles, building what we do is about trust, right? You are entrusted with lives, families, and so we have to expedite the trust building process.
Correct.
Right. And I think that sometimes the written word or lack of action or lack of rebranding or taking those initiatives, that could be that could hurt you in the long run. And I think it's important to kind of make those relatable stories. But
I 100% agree with that. And I think it's really saying, how do you go deeper? I still remember years ago, I was in a meeting with family members with a different organization we served, and I had one. We were talking about how to revise our mission statement. And a parent goes up, "It doesn't matter what your mission is; it's how you treat my son every day, and how his services are delivered, and are you doing that?" He goes, "I don't care what's on your wall or what's on a piece of paper.
Wow,
show me." Right, and I think that has stuck with me. Now, having a mission statement as a leader is helpful. To have a North Star, why you exist,
right?
But we don't need to be overcomplicated, or we don't have to sort of wordsmith it to death, because at the end of the day, it's how we're emulating that in the actual work that's the most powerful piece. And I think that's where sort of video or other sort of different media opportunities allows us to be able to tell that story in a way that's approachable.
So prioritizing execution and perfection over time.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great.
I'm curious to know about as the nature of services evolve with new technologies, how does that play into Fello's mission and the work that you're doing? How are you using technology and innovation to advance your mission?
So I think so we use the technology a lot in how we, predominantly from the employer staff perspective, and I think where our challenge is, how can we use technology to better support the actual services that we're providing the people we serve, and so how are we helping them access that technology? How are we helping them utilize that? And so we there's pockets of excellence in certain programs or with certain people we serve, but we haven't sort of universally that. So I think that's something that's is sort of the next phase of our work. I think we've invested a lot on, particularly around all the regulations that comes with the services that we provide. Technology has been a game changer, and that was an initiative we started in 2019. And so that was just a necessary piece, but now how do we sort of say these technology can help us. And we already do in our workforce development program where we sometimes make video snippets for the people we serve, or use technology for non-traditional interview approaches. And so there's just sort of different ways that we hopefully can be looking at that into the future.
Okay, great. I just have as we start to wrap up here, one of the questions I have is, we've talked a lot about the branding initiatives and what goes into it, but is there any advice that you do, besides True the Mission, anything else you'd share with those leaders out there to kind of sum up your thoughts for them on, should they rebrand? Should they get, if they're facing that, what should they consider?
So I think there's a couple of things you should consider. You should really have a deep understanding of who your organization is. Forget the words and the logo and that. Do you really know who that organization is?
I love that.
Understand its history, understand its present, but do you have a sense of where you're going in the future? That's first and foremost. Second is, what are your organizational values?
Yeah.
Are those values in transition? If they are, that needs to be sort of summed up first before that. I think, and then the third is, are you going to be the best champion in cheerleader for that? Do you even want to do that? Right?
Yeah, great question.
No, I think that's important to ask yourself.
Right? Like, because it already being the CEO or leader of any organization or group is the loneliest job. It really is. Yeah. It gets lonelier the bigger your organization is. And this is something, one, that is done, if it's done right, it generally is not with a ton of people, right? Yeah. And that sort of thing. And so you need to be comfortable with that. And it's not just May 21st was sort of when my job actually really started on with this rebrand, right? Of really being able to go out and tell the story with other team members, but really I'm the face of the organization for better or worse. And I have to be the ambassador of that. And I have to be wanting to be on podcasts and to talk to the media, to interact with our families and other stakeholders,
shake hands,
and that sort of thing, and that sort of thing, right? And so I think those are the three things that you really sort of, in addition to a whole lot more, but those are the three biggest ones. And I think it's really about, is a test of your own leadership. It's not something you can go through just because your board or ownership said, "Oh, we're going to go do this," and you're sort of like, all right, we'll do it. You have to really sort of embrace that. And I think that's one of our successes with the launch, I think, is that myself and our key leaders in our board, as they've been talking about this with community members, that excitement and passion comes through, right? And that's not measurable, and that is sort of, in many ways, the X factor of this success.
Yeah. That's great.
So I know you get up very early in the morning to start your day.
Yes.
And you had shared with us that one of the first things that you do is check your email. So, and then you get up and you do other things before you get started and start your day when you actually get into the office. I'm curious if you can impart any wisdom for leaders, at all stages, maybe not even going through a rebrand, but just leaders. How do you stay motivated to keep grinding that hard every single day?
So part of the reason I get up that between 4:30 and 5 every day is really about making sure I have time for myself. Right? It's the time where it's quiet in my house. The other people in my household are asleep. The dog is not up yet, right? And that sort of thing. And so I get a little bit of time to myself. Yeah. I get prepared for the day, and then I help my household get prepared for the day. And then I take a pause, and I work out 4 to 5 times a week. And so I'm then taking another hour for myself to be able to do that. And then by 8:45, I'm at the office, and then they have me until whatever time that is. And then I'm pivoting. So if I don't have evening events, then I'm pivoting to be back with my family, to be present until my son goes to bed, and then I might do that. But I think finding that being present for whatever I'm at. So if I'm supporting my household, I'm with my family, or I'm at work, I'm present. But making sure I'm carving out that time where I have it for myself. There was a week or so that my son was getting up the same time as me, and I was like, this isn't working for me, right? Because I wasn't getting that, right? And so just being honest and trying to figure out where that is. That's when it works for me. Other people's might be in the middle of the day, it might be at the end of the day, but really finding that time at least 4 to 5 times a week that you're getting time for yourself and investing in things that matter for yourself.
You're being intentional on that main item. You,
Right.
Yep.
others, whatever.
Yep.
It may
And
be.
you're following the in-flight rules. You're getting your oxygen mask
Yes.
secured before you can get
Yeah,
anyone
there-
else's
hey.
on
Well,
for
and
the
I'm
day.
also
Yeah.
making sure that I'm getting the appropriate amount of sleep, right? Like that.
Yeah.
And when I was earlier in my career, I was not as good at that, and it has been a fundamental switch over the last 5 years as I've invested in sort of making sure that sort of diet, exercise, but also making sure that I have what I need, whether
Yeah.
that's my own learning, my own reflection, my own time, has really been a game changer.
Well, I definitely want to say thank you very much for coming on today and sharing this. And before we sign off, I do want to ask you: are there any upcoming, now that everything's kind of evolved and changed, and what's your next big initiative? Is there a big program, initiative, or anything that you're focused on now?
So we have in our fellow communities, which is our affordable housing area, we have a number of developments in the pipeline that will
Okay.
be coming online, as well as we will have an exciting announcement about in the fall about an opportunity in Annapolis where we'll be able to serve the community in a different
Okay.
way, and so we have that to look forward to.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, we'll definitely have to connect with you again when that happens,
Yeah.
and we share it with the world. But that's awesome. So, well, Jonathon, thank you so much for coming on the show again. You're not only a great leader that I look to see, get some inspiration, see, reflect on my own, but you're a great friend of the podcast, a great friend of mine, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
For all those watching, I'm Alex Fakeri, your host. This is Jonathon Rondeau. Thanks for joining us today.
And I'm Holly Basta. Don't forget to like, share, and comment on this episode. And if you found value in it, hey, tell one of your friends to watch it and tune in too. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of The Diligent Leader.